Hey guys, and welcome to another one of my tutorials. In this video, I'll be showing you how to set up a grappling hook for your game. So just to show you how it works real quick, you can see as I look around, these little white circles will show up at various spots. And they show up depending on where I'm looking. So whichever one I'm looking the most at, it will show that one. And if I go ahead and press F, it will shoot out this little grappling hook, and I will grapple up to wherever I'm looking at. You can also grapple down, right across, and yeah, it just kind of works. So the way the system works, I just want to show you this real quick before we go ahead and encode it, is you can see around the map, I've just set up various little grappling points, which we'll be making in this tutorial for wherever I want to grapple to, and then the system will figure out, which one you're looking at the most, and then it will do the logic to get you up there, get you down, or wherever you need to go. All right, so with that being said, let's go ahead and just jump right into it. I'm going to be doing this from scratch, so you guys can follow along. So I'm just going to open up a new instance of Unreal real quick, and I'm using 4.25.3. I recommend being on this version or newer if you're following along, just to avoid any potential issues with versioning. And so let's go ahead and select Games down here and hit Next. And then we're going to be using the third-person template. So select that and hit Next. And then we want to make sure we have Blueprint selected, and we don't need starter content, so you can leave that as no starter content. And then I'll just call this Grapple Tutorial, and then go ahead and create the project. So while that's opening, let me just move this guy over here. Okay, so here we go. So this is just an empty project, obviously. So we need to add in a couple things here before we can get started. One thing, just in case you guys want this, I will have the texture that I was using for that little circle in a link in the description of this video, so you can go ahead and download it. And it should look something like this, the download folder, just a TGA file. So let's go ahead and import that. You can obviously use your own texture for the little icon thing. It doesn't really matter, but if you want it, it will be in the description of this video. And so whichever one you do decide to use, just make sure you open it up. And we want to change the type to user interface. And we want to change the texture group to UI. We can save that and close. And we're just doing that because it's going to be showing like technically on the UI or as a UI element, so it makes it render correctly. Okay, so that's the only real file we need to import. Everything else we'll be making here from scratch. So let's go back to the content folder. And oh, actually, let's move this guy. Well, actually, yeah. So let's go back to the content folder and make a new folder and call it grappling, and we'll just go ahead and put all of our grappling code inside of here. And let's move that texture in here as well, because I forgot where I put that. Yeah, so I'm just going to drag this into my grappling folder, just so it's all nice and together. Okay, so we're going to create the blueprints, all the blueprints that we're going to need first, and then we'll go ahead and fill them out second. So the first thing we need is a component. So right click and go to Blueprint Class, and we want to select Actor Component. And this is going to be our grappling component. So all of the grappling code is going to be contained within this grappling component. So all you need to do if you want to add the ability to grapple to your character is you just give him this component and it'll just work. So we'll call this the grapple component, like so. The next thing we want is the targets, so those little circles around the maps. We need a blueprint for those. So let's right click and make a new blueprint class. And this is going to be of type actor, and we will call this BP grapple target. And let's open this guy up real quick. So inside of here, we want to change, if you go up to class settings, or sorry, class settings, I think. Yeah, class settings, and then hit this, no, where is this? Where is the tick thing? Oh, start with tick enabled. So we want to uncheck this under class defaults, search for tick, and we want to uncheck start with tick enabled because we don't need this actor to tick at all because it's obviously it's not going to be moving. It doesn't need the tick to be called, so it's just a little optimization thing. So we can compile and save and close this. And then let's continue making our blueprints. So come back here and right click again. The next thing we need is the actual like wire that comes out. So to do that, let's make a new blueprint class, and then we want to hit this all classes drop down here, and we want to change the parent type to a cable actor. And go ahead and select that, and we'll call this the BP grapple line. And it should look like a little telephone wires symbol, so make sure you selected the correct one. The next thing we need is the actual grappling hook itself, so like the piece at the end that flies out and hits this thing. So right click again, make a new blueprint class of type actor, and we'll call it BP grapple hook. And then we need two more things. So we need the widget that's going to show, like this little circular thing. So right click and say user interface and make a widget blueprint. And we'll call this the grapple target underscore widget. I think I spelled target wrong. Target widget. And then the final thing we need is an enum to keep track of the current state of the grappling hook. So right click and go to blueprints and go to enumeration. And we will call this E for enumeration, grapple state. And then we can just edit or do this one real quick since we're here. So double click on this guy to open it up. And inside of here, we want to add 4 different states. So hit the new button over here 4 times. And then the first one is going to be retracted. So this is going to be the state of the grappling hook when you haven't fired it yet. So like it's still retracted. The next state is going to be firing. So this is obviously the state for when the grappling hook is currently being firing and it's moving through the air. The next one we want is going to be called nearing target, and I'll explain why we need this more later, but essentially it's going to go into this state whenever it's getting close to hitting the target, but it's not quite there yet. And then finally, the last one is on target. So this one's going to be used whenever the grappling hook has connected with the target. All right, so save this, and we can close it. We'll be making use of this enum a little bit later. Okay, so now we have all of our blueprints set up, and we have our enums and our textures imported, so we can go ahead now and start writing some of this code. So the first thing we want to do is add some code to our character so that when we press the F key or whatever key you choose to use, it will, well, actually, maybe we shouldn't do that first. Let me think about it. Yeah, actually, the first thing we should probably do is make it so that you can walk around and the game will show you where the available targets are. So just to show you what we're about to do before we do it here, let me pull over my other project. So you can see as I walk around, it shows these little white circles depending on where I'm looking. So let's do it. Let's go ahead and do that first, because I think that's probably the best thing to do first in this case. So to do that, that code's going to be inside of the grapple component. So let's go ahead and open the grapple component up again. And let me open it up on my other monitor so I have something to reference here. Okay, so we're going to be adding a good amount of our code inside of here. Like I said before, this is where the majority of the stuff is going to happen. So let's see. Let's go. We do need both of these. So let's start inside of begin play. So the first thing we want to do before we do anything else is we want to get a reference to the character that owns this component, which of course is going to be our player, so that we can easily reference him later. So to do that, we're just going to say get owner. And so that's going to give us the owner of the component, which of course, again, is the character. So we can cast this. So we'll say cast to third person character. So if you're adding this to your own game, then you want to cast this to whatever character you're using. But we're going to cast it to our third person character since that's the one we're using. And then we want to right click on this and say promote to variable. And so that will create a variable over here. And then we'll just go ahead and call this the owning character. And again, we're just doing this so we can easily reference the owning character whenever we need to later. And then the next thing we want to do is get it set up so that it will tick, because the tick is going to be the thing that updates those little circles, because each frame is going to be checking in to figure out which one you're looking at and like essentially which one's the best candidate for grappling to. So to do that, obviously we only want to do that if the grappling hook has not been fired yet, because if you're currently grappling or if you're in the process of grappling, we don't want those circles to be showing because you can't grapple when you're already grappling. So we need to add some logic in here, which only does this if we aren't currently grappling on anything yet. And we're going to make use of that enum for this. So let's add a variable over here on the left again and call it the grapple state. And let's change it to be that enum that we created. So we'll call it E, or the variable type will be E grapple state. And then real quick, for both of these variables, I forgot to do this, let's set them to private. So hit the little private and private. And the reason we're doing this, if you don't already know what private does, it just makes it so that these variables cannot be accessed from outside of the class. And it's just kind of like a precaution thing to make it so that, you obviously you don't want some other class changing these variables, only ourselves. And then I'm also going to put them into a private category. So if you just type in the word private here in the category, it will make a private category, and then you can just drag the other one in. So now they're both private, and they're both inside of a private category, which just kind of keeps things organized. But the reason we did this is so that we can, like I said, we only want to do this logic for checking where the circles are if the grappling state is set to retracted. So if we drag this in, and then we do a switch, and we want to hook that up to the event tick. So you can see here, it's created these little pins for us, and we only want to do our logic if we're inside of retracted, but we're going to want to do other stuff in these other cases as well. So what I'm actually going to do here is just create 4 functions, one function that handles each of these cases. So up here on the top left, let's hit function, and we will call this tick retracted. So this is the tick function that's going to use whenever it's retracted, and we'll set this to private. And then we can just duplicate this. Oops. Right click and duplicate. And we'll call this one tick firing. And then duplicate that again. And we'll call this tick mirroring target. And one more. And call it tick on target. So now if we come back here to our event graph, we can just drag these guys in to the correct spots. So it's going to do that when it's retracted. It's going to do this when it's firing. And hopefully you see the pattern here, pretty straightforward. So say we can have it do, custom logic depending on the current state of the grappling hook. So the one we care about right now is the tick retracted, because that's the logic that needs to run to figure out, which circle we want to show on the screen. So let's come inside of here. And the first thing we want to do is we want to do essentially figure out, we want to figure out which one of these, or which of these little grappling targets are within range. Because if they're 10 miles away from us, we don't even want to consider them as a potential candidate. We only want to consider the ones that are, within a certain range of us. So to do that, we can do a sphere overlap and say, give me all the targets, all the grappling hook targets that are inside of this sphere. So we can just right click and say sphere overlap actors, which is just a handy little function, which returns an array of actors that overlap the given sphere. And so the position of the sphere is going to be, or the center position of the sphere is going to be our player's position, because obviously he's the center. So we can just drag in our owning character, and we will say get actor location. We'll go ahead and hook that up to the center point. And then the sphere radius can really be whatever you want. So obviously the bigger number you put here, the further away you'll be able to grapple. But a good thing to do would be to just right click and say promote to variable. So that way we can easily change it later. And then we will call this the max grapple distance. And then we want to drag this, or we want to add this to the private category as well. But this is a special type of variable because it's really just a constant variable. It's really just something you want to set. It's kind of like a setting. It's just something you want to set before the game starts, and then not really change it later. So because it's like a constant variable, we can set it to blueprint read only. And then we also want to set it to private. And so I'm going to add it to the private category, but I'm also going to add it to a constant category. So to do that, you can say private, and then you can do shift. And then if you hit the backslash key, like it's right above the enter key and right below the backspace key, you'll get like a vertical pipe. And then say constants. So you can see because I added that little vertical pipe, it's now added a constants under private. And we put that inside of there because it's a constant private variable. And again, that's just for organization. You don't really have to do that, but I definitely recommend it. Okay, so that's our distance, and let's set this to something. So compile, and then that's fine. It's giving us an error, but that's fine. Just compile and then set this to like, I think I used 10,000, which maybe it's a little too high, but you can lower it or set it higher in your game depending on what you want. But again, that's just how far away, you'll be able to grapple. And then finally, we want to set the object type. So drag off of this and say make array. And so this is saying, which of these object types we're going to overlap with. And we want to use world static because the target in the world, like the little target points, the circles, they're going to be world static. So those are the only ones we really care about. And then we can hit compile. So now it should be good. So now we have, we need to change this as well. The actor class, obviously, we need to change this to be our BP _ grapple target. Make sure you select grapple target. So we're saying, give me all the BP grapple targets inside of this sphere. Okay, so now that we have that, we can do a loop over these and figure out which one is the best candidate. So I'm going to make a little function for that just to make things a little bit easier. So let's come up here and let's make a new function, and we will call it find best target. And for these functions, we can probably make them all in a private category as well, because you remember we set all of these to private, but let's also set this one to private because it definitely should be private. And then let's move all these to a private category as well. So I'll just make a private category and then drag all these guys in. Okay, so the find best target function, the inputs and outputs are going to be pretty straightforward. So just click on this guy. So for the inputs, we want to add an array of actors. So change this to actor, object reference to an actor, and then change this to array, which is this little grid here, and then call this the targets. So this is going to be all of the targets that are in range. And then we want to output the best one. So we want to add an output variable of actor, except we don't want this one to be an array because it's just going to be 1. And we will call this the target. This is going to be, takes in all of the targets and it just returns one of them, whichever one is the best. So to figure that out, we're going to start with a for each loop. And then we're going to cache this little variable. So right click and say promote to local variable. Make sure you hit local variable and not promote to variable, because we want it to be a local variable so that it's only in scope when we're inside of this function. So promote to local variable, hook that up, and then change this name to current target, and then in parentheses, put local. And this is important because we're going to eventually have another variable that's not local that's going to be called current target. So make sure you call this one current target and then in parentheses put local so that we can easily distinguish it later. And also it's just kind of nice to see which ones are local just by looking at the variable name. So again, that's really important. Make sure you get the naming correct and that you made it a local variable and not a normal variable. If you didn't do that, then you're not going to have a good time. Okay, so now we have our current target. So we're looping over them. We get our current target. The first thing we want to do is a line trace to figure out if we can even see this target, because if this target's like behind a building or something, even though it's in range, if we can't see it, we don't want to be able to grapple to it. So to do that, we're going to do a line trace. So we'll say line trace by channel. That up. So the start is going to be our character's camera, because that's where he's kind of looking from. Or maybe it should be the character. I don't really know which one would be better. Maybe we'll just use the character. That probably sounds better. So drag in the character and say get actor location. So that's where the line trace is going to start from. And then the end location is obviously going to be our current target, our local current target, which again is just whatever the current loop is. And we'll get their location. So get actor location. That's our end location. And we can even draw this. So we'll say, or trace channel, we want visibility. We can leave all this empty. The actors to ignore, actually we want to ignore the player, obviously, because we don't want this hitting the player, so drag that in. And if you just hook it up to the array, it will make an array for you. But yeah, like I was saying, we can turn on the draw debug time just so we can see it. So we'll set this to for duration, just so we can kind of debug what's going on. And then let's go. I know this doesn't do anything yet, but let's just hook this up, and then we're going to create our targets, and then we're going to run it just so you can kind of see what's happening, because I don't want to do it all too fast. This way you guys can make sure you don't have anything messed up. So before this is going to obviously do anything, we need to add this component to our character, and we need to create those little targets in the scene. So let's do that first. So let's come back here, and let's open up our BP grapple target. And then if this pops up, just hit open full blueprint editor. So inside of here, we want to replace this default scene root with a billboard. So to do that, we will add a billboard. So hit billboard, and then it's gonna, by default, it adds it to the scene root, but we want to replace it. So just take it and drag it and drop it, and then it should just replace it. And then after that, we can set this to be our texture, or whichever one you chose. So I think it's called T_grapple target, yeah. So you can see it changed it to look like this. Now, one thing to note here, just because this might be confusing, so this billboard is only going to show in the editor. And what I mean by that is that if you drag this guy in now, you can see that little symbol shows up. But by default, billboards don't show when you run the game. So if I go and I run the game, you can see it doesn't actually show up. And we actually are going to be showing it in game using a widget component. Now, I know some of you might be saying, well, can't you just set it to not be hidden in game? Which you can, and I'll show you that real quick. So if you uncheck hidden in game on the widget, then if I run it, you can see it shows up. But it's kind of this weird, it's in this weird state where like it's actually in 3D space. You can see it like gets behind things, and we don't actually want that. We want it to always be in front of things. And since we want that behavior, we don't want to use a billboard. We want to use a widget and set it to screen space. So make sure you have this set back to hidden in game. This is just so we can see it when we're editing it in the editor. So to have it actually seen in game, we want to add a widget component. So come up here and say widget. It's like that. And then it should be a child of your billboard, which is correct, which is how we want it. And then finally, we need to add a little sphere collider on it. So we can use that to figure out if we're overlapping with it. So search for sphere collision and add that as well. Now we need to do a couple things here with the collision. First of all, click on the billboard, and then actually, do we need to do anything? Hold on. Let me check my over the project. I don't think we need to do anything with that. It's the widget that has collision, isn't it? Oh, maybe it doesn't have collision. Oh, yeah, it does. Yeah, so the widget over here on the right, select the widget, and then over here on the right, we want to just totally disable collision for this widget because we don't want any collision happening with it. So uncheck generate overlap events, set this to none, and then we can set this to no collision as well, and then compile and save. But the sphere we want to have some collision for, so click on the sphere, and then again search for collision. So for this, we want to set can character step up on to no. We want to set the collision preset to custom because we're going to be doing a little bit of custom stuff. And we want this to be query only, which is good. We want to change the type to be world static, and we're doing that because, well, the object isn't moving. If your targets are going to be moving, like if you have them on a moving platform, then you're probably going to need to set this to world dynamic. And then you're probably going to need to come back here and change this to be, or where did we do the, where did we do that? Yeah, you're probably going to need to change this to world dynamic if your targets are going to be moving, but since ours are not, we can set it to world static. So set it to world static, and then we want to set everything to overlap, except we want to set the visibility to be blocking. And we're going to do that because when we do the line trace, we're going to be doing the line trace on the visibility channel, and the visibility needs to be set to blocking in order for the line trace to hit it. And you can probably actually just set all of these. Well, yeah, just leave it like this, and that should be good. So make sure you have this correct. It's really important that you have this correct. Feel free to pause it, but that's how it needs to be. Okay, so in order for actually to see this in game, like I said, we need this widget to be set to something. So we need to go ahead and fill out this widget real quick. So let's come back here to our grapple target widget and open this guy up. So this is going to be a really simple widget. It's basically just going to be a image with a size box around it. So we can delete this canvas panel, and instead we'll add a size box and drag this guy in. And so you can set the size depending on how big you want it to be, but for me, I had it as 32 by 32. So click on the size box, And then we want to check the width and the height override and set both of these guys to 32. And then just to see what it looks like, you can come up here and say custom and set this to 32 by 32 as well. And you kind of zoom in here. And so inside of the size box, we want to add an image. So drag an image onto the size box. And then for the image, we're obviously going to select that same texture. So under brush, you can hit the drop down, and then you can select a texture. So we want the T underscore grapple target, like so. So that's our widget. That's really all there is to it. Pretty straightforward. So we can now just close this, and then back over here, if we select our widget, we can come over here on the right and change the widget class to be our grapple target widget. And then we want to change the space from world space to screen space. And then we want to select draw at desired size so that it actually draws at that 32 by 32. So now if we compile and save this, and we come back here, let's save all again. Come back here and we add our grapple target somewhere, our grapple target. So let's just add one here at this corner. And then run the game. You can see, oh, we still have this one here as well. So these are our 2 targets in the game. And again, it's not selecting the best one yet because we haven't finished writing that code. We haven't even added the component to our character yet. But you can see now they're showing in game in screen space, which is good. And by screen space, it means, so if I walk in front of it, you can still see it. And that's the way we want this because it's more of like a HUD pop-up thing than anything else. So let me delete this guy. So so the next thing we're going to be doing is making it so that it chooses the best one. And maybe we should add 2 so that we can actually see this working once we start doing it. So I'm going to end part 1 right here, and then we'll pick it up again in part 2. But it should look like this. You should be able to see both of them in your scene at once, and they should be in screen space like this. All right, so I'll see you guys in part 2.